investment. So much so that he was a judge this morning in our business plan competition, and he is the founder and managing partner of a firm called Near Earth LLC, and he's here to talk to us today about a study he put out, and, well, I will let him talk to you about it. Please welcome to the stage Hoyt Davidson.
Good afternoon. About a year ago, Charles Miller and Doug Comstock gave us a call, invited us to come down to NASA headquarters and help them think about space commercialization. In particular, they were planning to get a larger budget and were wondering how they could do bigger, greater, more effective things with it, get public-private partnerships right, and more importantly, leverage that government money, which is ever more scarce these days, into attracting even larger amounts of private capital to help NASA do all the bold things they need to do. So they brought us in, I think for a couple of reasons. Our backgrounds, my partner and I worked at Lockheed, my partner worked at Hughes and other aerospace companies, so we understood some of the technical challenges, but had been on Wall Street quite a while. Banks that I've worked for and groups I've worked for have been connected with over $25 billion worth of investments in companies like Pan Am Sat and EchoStar and XM Satellite Radio and lots of others, some that worked, some that didn't work. So they were, I think, interested in our perspective as outsiders looking into this issue. And we were delighted to help out, but we didn't want it to be all about our perspective. So we interviewed 45 different people from all walks of life, aerospace companies, satellite operators, people at NASA, lots of entrepreneurs, and also spent some time going back and looking at different commercial space projects that had been funded either entirely with private capital or with a mix of government and private capital, and trying to see what worked, what didn't, what lessons we could learn from that. And from that process, we decided to answer this question for NASA, we needed to do three things, really. One was to create a primer for people at NASA who may not spend as much time as we do talking to investors, to understand what their concerns are, how they perceive risk, what their tolerances are for risk, what the different types of investors are, from angel investors to venture capitalists, private equity firms, public investors, strategic investors. They all look at the world a little differently. They're all willing to take different types of risk or magnitude of risk. And then go back and look at some of these cases and see what they did and why they did it, and if they do it again. And then the second thing we needed to do is look at what NASA was currently doing and had been doing and critique it from an outsider's point of view as to how we thought, how effectively we thought it was. Did we think with some minor tweaking they could use these same programs to achieve much bigger results? And the third thing, and I guess a follow-on to that, was if not, then what additional initiatives, activities, programs could NASA think about starting, deploying to, again, help drastically increase the amount of private capital and risk-taking coming in from industry. The third and final task was NASA had put together a group of people from all the different centers and directorates to come up with their priorities. Charles talked about that. They're listed here. And take these current and suggested new initiatives and talk about how they could help NASA achieve these 5 different objectives, LCRATs, as Charles mentioned, being the number one. I'm not going to have enough time to go into much detail on any of this. I could spend 8 hours briefing these 2 reports. You can see it was over 300 pages. But I do want to give you a taste of some of the things we found and some of the ideas that we talked about. But before I do that, if you want to find the common theme to all of that is, how do we talk institutional investors who are the guardians of vast amounts of private capital into putting that money to work in the commercial space industry when they could put that same money to work in lots of other industries that they understand better, that have more understandable markets, and whose risk-reward characteristics they've been dealing with for many years. But in particular, how do you get these institutional investors to part with their money? So I thought I'd run a quick video clip. I don't know if I can do that or you can do that. If anyone recognized this title, this is a video clip from Star Wars, where a Jedi Knight is trying to talk a merchant out of a piece of equipment that he needs. Okay, that's all right. All right. They would not be. Basically, the merchant is saying, your Jedi mind tricks don't work on me, only money works. And that's really the way the investors think. Mark Sarangelo was talking yesterday about people in the industry doing a lot of things for passion as opposed to money. Well, for these institutional investors, money is their passion, so it's hard to get them to part with it. We'll move on. So we first wanted to understand the problem, and this really comes down to what are the barriers to getting these investors to depart with their money. There was clearly a lot of risk inherent in this industry, all the typical risk plus more. That was holding them back. I think they did get the sort of visionary statement that sometime in the future this was all going to be immensely valuable, but that wasn't enough to give them the urgency to put money to work today. So just talking about the great future and the vision, wasn't really making the sell. Also, there was, I think, the fact in many cases that to put money to work here, you had to have a really strong stomach for taking risk. You had to be somewhat of a believer and want to do this for the good of mankind or your own personal legacy or something other than, it was the best place you could put your money out of all the other investments. And there aren't too many investors out there other than, some of the high net worth investors that are very prominent in this industry that are willing to do that. Luckily, we do have many billionaires who love this industry and have gotten some very exciting companies off the ground to sort of jumpstart this process. And I think some of those are very exciting prospects for NASA then to support. But I think our feeling was that would at the end of the day, that was great, but it would not be enough. You really needed to be able to make some gains within these larger pools of disinterested capital. The path to getting there, so since we've got these huge barriers, this big challenge, well, what is the path to getting there? I think it's really twofold. As part of our background research, we came across an amazing article written in 1961, so 50 years ago, by Ralph Cortender, who was then the chief executive officer of General Electric, so obviously a very prominent, accomplished businessman. And this was, during the Cold War, and we were setting up our space program. And he basically says in this article, yes, it was necessary that we create NASA to lead us into space. It's important that we, do this quickly and that we beat, the Russians. But this isn't the way the U.S. normally creates industries. The U.S. normally relies on capitalism, commercial markets to create an industry. And at some point in the future, we're going to have to sort of transition some of this responsibility from a government entity over to the commercial world and set up an industry. And that's going to be challenging, it's going to be painful, but we're going to have to do it. 50 years later, we're here talking about that process. If you Google it, I highly recommend you look at it. But he sort of looked at the world as there's space exploration, which is obviously a prime objective of NASA. That's very risky. Investors aren't going to put money in that. So if you want the industry to help you there, you got to do fixed price contracts and take all the risk. At some point, though, you get to areas or applications where there is a commercial market. Maybe the government's still the biggest market, but there is a commercial market. And there is an ability to share some risk, and industry is willing to share some risk. And you should do that. I mean, examples of that obviously are COTS, CCDEV, where industry is willing to step up and take substantial amounts of risk. The third level is where the risk has been retired to the point where industry will take all of the risk. And we have a $100 billion commercial satellite industry now. I think Clay Murray talked about how many satellites and launches there are. It's a very vibrant industry. The U.S. is still a leader in that industry, and that's now fully commercialized. And I think Corninger was saying, well, the goal is to keep that process going, keep having NASA at the forefront, doing the hard, complicated stuff, and when they can, turn stuff over on a cost-sharing basis, and then eventually markets will mature. And I think that's the path. You know, it's easier to say than to achieve, but that certainly is the path. The second part of the path, well, how do you do that? I mean, to really make these markets commercially viable as opposed to just something that government can afford to do, you really have to get the cost down and reliability down. And that comes into why I think there was a total consensus within the working group that LCRATS was the #1 goal, and for all of the reasons listed there. Well, you know, in this time of, you know, tight budgets, you know, why can't industry do it itself? Why should the government, you know, step in? I think one of the reasons is it is different with industry. The commercial space industry has all of the same risks of any other industry, any other business, and it has a whole set of unique risks that other industries don't share, including potential catastrophic risk that you lose, you know, $1 billion worth of infrastructure. And, you know, it's somewhere where you can't really fix it so easily. So there are extra risks. And I think there's even probably worse than that. Again, as Charles mentioned, the #1 barrier when we went through all of these interviews and studies was market. How big is the market? Well, the market is very uncertain. And the market risk isn't how big is the total market? Is it going to be a $20 million market? It matters to investors. Is it going to be a $20 billion market in 2 years or in 20 years? That ramp up matters in terms of your return on investment. Is that market window going to be a 30 or 40 or 50-year market, or is it really a 10-year window and then it goes away? All these different types of risk are very important to private investors. I gave a little example here. This was EchoStar, who we spent a lot of time supporting. At the bottom of this trough here in terms of cash flow, they invested $2.5 billion. It took them 13 years to get to a point where they had positive cash flow through their whole cycle. The only reason they were able to do that is because DirecTV, which was incubated by Hughes, had created the business. It was a consumer mass market business, a product that everyone understood, TV and better quality TV. And they also had the luck of starting the financing at the peak of the high yield market when they could get lots of money cheaply and not even have to issue debt. That it would not even be possible to start EchoStar today. So, you know, if in a market that's that juicy for investors, it took 13 years to get positive cash flow, not too many investors are willing to wait that long. So that's why government needs to come in and help prime the pump. Well, okay, that makes sense from a private investor, but again, why should the U.S. government support it? We sort of looked at 4 reasons. This is an important industry for national security and also for economic leadership. It's one of the few industries where the U.S. is still the leader. We're having some challenges to that leadership on some of the more mature sectors, and that challenge will increase over time from low-cost manufacturing, which heightens the need for us to stay on the technology forefront. And to stay on the technology forefront takes a lot of capital to develop and fly, you know, new capabilities. Of course, supporting commercial space, if we get it right, will also help NASA achieve all of its goals more cost effectively. And I would add a 4th one, that there's lots of broad benefits to society in terms of high income jobs, inspiring students or STEM education. You know, there's been a lot of talk about shovel-ready jobs. Well, we certainly need lots of quality bridges and roads, but I think to win the future, what you really need is to invest in mind-ready jobs. And we have right now a lot of very high caliber minds out there with not a lot to do, and it'd be good to find mind ready jobs to invest in. I think commercial space is one of those areas. So what's the challenge for NASA? I think it's really threefold. It's going to take a lot of new technologies for LCRATs, for commercial in-space servicing, for all these different priorities. So that's going to require an exponential increase in innovation. And NASA's done a great job through the seed fund and centennial challenges and inspiring innovation. I think that needs to go to an even higher level. If they can do that, they can really leverage the whatever government funding they get to do this and create a positive feedback loop where they show the success, so the public is willing to give them more money, and that creates even more success. And ultimately, the goal is to have a sustainable, affordable, and amazing commercial space industry, and sustainable, affordable, and amazing NASA. And I think amazing is, unfortunately, an important part of that. And I think it's NASA's own fault that the public expects you to be amazing, because you've been amazing for so many years. You've done so many phenomenal things. There's an expectation that you're going to continue to do amazing things, and if you're not, then the public loses interest and may have challenges on Capitol Hill of getting budget. So doing amazing things is, I think, a part of it. So we have this historical opportunity to help grow commercial space in a way that benefits not only NASA but the citizens of our country. That really means we got to get the investment side of public-private partnerships right. And that means we have to have the right support mechanism for the right application at the right stage. And every application, every stage is going after a different type of investor who has a different risk profile, and it matters how you match up those programs. So what are some of the lessons learned from the past? Certainly technology risk. Any rocket program has a huge amount of technology risk. Even if the rocket technology hasn't changed much, just creating a vehicle and testing it and proving it requires lots of money, lots of time, there's lots of risk involved. I don't think there's any way around that. I think the lesson we learned there is that investors appreciate companies that take baby steps. Whether it is companies like the ones mentioned, Blue Origin, Armadillo, Marsden, doing suborbital as a baby step to orbital, or if it's SpaceX doing Falcon 1, Falcon 9, and Falcon Heavy. Doing the baby steps allows investors to manage their exposure, let you achieve milestones, retire risk, and move on. Market risk, again, was by far the most important risk, and I think there, really for many of these applications, the government's going to have to be the early primary market. In some cases, an anchor tenant. In other cases, they may need to help support the development of a commercial market so that they're not the only market, or they may need to be the first buyer of a new product or service so that they can prove that it works in space, so then the commercial industry steps in. Financial risk, I think the financial risk would go away if there were no technology risk and no market risk, but because there are, it means the amount of capital you need and the amount of time you need to get to positive cash flow are highly variable. And if you're a venture capitalist and you need a 30 or 35% annual return on investment, and the amount of money you need all of a sudden doubles, or the time you need to get to market increases by 2 years, you can't close the business case. And so the financial risk has a lot to do with return on investment and meeting those hurdles. And how can NASA, when it makes sense, help lower those risks so that the ROI can be achieved. Competing risk, I always say that 2 is a very big number in space. I mentioned DirecTV and EchoStar. There were a total of 6 different companies that tried at one point to do satellite TV to the US. Only 2 survived. There's GOI and Digital Globe. Only 2 survived. XM and Sirius Radio, there were 2 because the government realized 2 was a big number, and that was still too big, and now there's 1. So we need a big funnel at the front end to have a lot of innovators with a lot of solutions come into the pie. But at the end, there needs to be a winnowing process so there is enough market for the 1 or 2 companies that survive this Darwinian sort of evolution. And of course, execution risk does matter. The best market in the world won't get you anything if you don't have the right management and the right people to pull it off. NASA support, key findings. We thought all the programs we looked at that NASA was doing had a very important role in the whole ecosystem, and there was nothing we thought that was being done that wasn't beneficial and that shouldn't be continued. In many cases, we thought some were highly effective and should be expanded. We really loved the COTS program, and I could spend half an hour telling you all the reasons, but we were advising one of the companies that did not get chosen for COTS. But I can tell you, I was in the office of a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm, and they wrote a letter saying if our client was chosen, they would put $50 million in. And this is a fund that had never done anything like this before, but because of the strength of COTS, because it not only matched funds, but NASA was doing a lot of the technical and market due diligence for the investor. They were following the milestone achievements so that the risk exposure was mitigated upon success. At the end of the day, there was CRS, there was a big contract, implicitly there for these COTS players. That combination was extremely powerful. Now, unfortunately, you can't do COTS for everything. It takes a lot of money, but where it makes sense, it's very powerful, and I think it will, as it did before, attract interest. Why don't I skip those? I'm sure you can read ahead. I don't want to run out of time too much. So we sort of looked at the task of achieving support of the commercial space industry. It's really, there's 6 things that needed to be done. It's the first, oddly enough, was NASA needed to do some work changing perceptions. Almost to a person, everyone we contacted said they loved NASA, very impressed with NASA, but they either didn't trust them or had a bad experience or didn't want to work with them, or if they did have to work with them, they were very nervous, or they wanted to minimize the amount of work they did with them. So there's a big perception problem out there that can be fixed and needs to be fixed. We talked about inspiring innovation. Once you have the new technologies, that's not enough. These companies still need support to get through the TRL level and turn it into something that's ready to be demonstrated. Then you need to demonstrate it. Even once you have something that's working, you don't necessarily have a market, so the government needs to help build the market. And again, even when you've got a market, doesn't mean the investors will think the business case is closed to give them the returns that they need for the risk that they've taken. So you have to help enhance the capital formation. So let me just focus on these charts. There's a lot of words. You can read them. I'm not going to read them. But for each one of these, I wanted to talk about a couple of new ideas that we discussed with NASA that they could do to help each one of them. For improving perceptions, we thought one of the easiest things to do would be for NASA to come out with a commercialization roadmap. Sort of going back to that Cordinger 3-level path, is to say, for NASA to have a clear written statement that says, this is what NASA is going to do, this is our territory, and here's the things we're interested in turning over to industry, and we're not going to compete with you on those things. If it's on that side of the commercial roadmap, it's yours, we're going to help support you to build it, but have a very clear roadmap, and it may evolve over time, but have it so that it's there for every center and directorate at NASA to see and abide by. We certainly think the seed capital and Centennial Challenge programs are very effective, and we would recommend increasing that activity, increasing the funding to the extent you possibly can. And for fostering innovation, we also thought that some of the challenges for instance, you would get 100, 150 different entrants from academia, from entrepreneurs, people in their garage, students, and get some very clever ideas. And one person would win a somewhat nominal prize, and it was mostly for bragging rights, and it's certainly helpful when you're in front of an investor to say you competed against 140 people and you won, and you've got NASA's seal of approval. That's very helpful and important. But just like we had the business plan competition this morning, there were 5 competitors and there's 3 prizes being given out. So to the extent it's not always a winner take all, but you're encouraging and rewarding and moving more and more people down the line, that's fine. The other idea was to have 2-tier competitions. If you're familiar with the poker tournaments, there's satellite poker tournaments where if you win, you get $10,000 and you use that to enter the bigger poker tournament, that if you win that one, you get $1 million. Where I think there's an opportunity here where you can have competition set up where you're doing smaller, maybe earlier stage or component level things for one challenge, and then that money can be used to fund your efforts for a bigger challenge with higher level goals, and perhaps those bigger challenges can then attract some mid-size, even larger aerospace companies that want to team with the entrepreneurs to bring their talent base and their facilities together to help win. So we think the whole challenge thing is something that can be expanded to maybe get much bigger things done. Supporting technology development, this is something that we personally find a lot at Near Earth because we work with early stage companies, early stage space companies, and we've known lots of stories where a company has gone through a phase 1, a phase 2 SBIRs, and now they've got a technology, it's a prototype, NASA likes it or DARPA likes it, someone likes it, and they need $2 or $3 million to get it to a commercialized project. So they go to the venture capital community, and unfortunately the venture capital community's idea of a seed round is now $5 or $6 million. And there's very few venture capitalists that even focus on this sector anyway. They're doing internet media and biotech and alternative energy and other things. But if you found one that would focus on this industry, their funds are so big they don't really want to spend time looking at investing $2 or $3 million. So you go to the angel community. In the angel community, typical angel investor will put in $25,000 to $100,000 on an investment, and the pool of them may put $1 million package together. So there's really not a lot of opportunity for these very innovative companies that have successfully gone through 2 phases of a SBIR program to go out and raise that capital to get that product to commercialization. We call it's not our terminology, but it's called Death Valley, and we've seen 2 companies just in the last 6 months go bankrupt because of this very situation. So we think one thing that makes a lot of sense is to think about a SBIR's 3, maybe $1 million sort of level, a SBIR's 4, maybe $2, $3 million levels. And these are companies that, again, have successfully gone through the different stages, and there may be some winnowing process to where you can get them to the point where the venture capital community is interested in them. They do have a commercialized product, or they have something that's flight proven. The other idea we thought was very interesting was the InQtel model. If you're not familiar with InQtel, years ago the CIA created a strategic fund. It's not a venture capital fund. It's not like Red Planet Capital. Its goal is to invest in technologies that the intelligence community has a need for. They don't take voting stock. They don't sit on boards, so they can avoid all conflicts. They take generally options in the company. Their investments always come with a contract, so you get it to the point of commercialization, which we're going to help you fund. We're going to buy it. They typically co-invest with other venture capitalists, which the venture capitalists love. Again, it's like the COTS model. You've got the customer doing the due diligence for you and telling you when it works, they're going to buy it. InQtel's done over 400 of these investments. They've made lots of money. They're self-sustaining. They don't need to go to Congress and get more money. It just keeps feeding itself. And this is something we think NASA should really take a hard look at. Again, not Red Planet Capital, but the InQtel model. Demonstrating new capabilities. Again, where it makes sense, you can't beat the structure of COTS and CRS it's really the combination of those two. That type of a program is extremely powerful in terms of attracting capital. But there's other things that can be done. For instance, if you agree to buy the first product, you don't have to agree necessarily to be the anchor tenant for so many years, but if you agree to buy the first product and test it in space or use it in space or whatever, that opens up their ability to sell to commercial people who aren't going to buy it until someone else has tested it. So we think that's a big thing. There's other things like free flight challenge programs that could be important. Validating markets. In some cases, NASA, DoD, someone will need to be an anchor tenant. It's just the amount of billions of dollars that has to be developed for, say, a reusable vehicle to go to orbit needs a certain amount of contracts there in order for those companies to raise that magnitude of capital. So there are some cases where NASA will need to take more risk and figure out how to do forward purchase agreements, which Congress hates. But I think there is a need to do that sort of thing. And lastly, in terms of my 6 categories, is enhancing capital formation. And that mostly means reducing the downside risk for investors. That's the biggest concern. You also can help them improve their returns by things like tax credits and other tax programs. But really it comes down to finding ways to help them achieve that ROI. And one way is to do loan guarantees. Now, loan guarantees have a nasty reputation, and among some people on Capitol Hill, and for some good reasons. It's not a tool that you would use frequently. It's only a tool that you would use for programs that had reached a certain level of maturity, so that you did not think the risk of default was very high. But for those programs, if you have a loan guarantee, then you're basically allowing the company to finance off something close to the treasury rate. That means if you have 50% debt financing at 6% or 5%, then the amount of equity you need can more easily achieve its equity rate of return. We looked into one of the programs, or one of the infrastructures to sort of manage a program like that, and came across the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. And if you read their charter, they're basically there to issue loan guarantees and to co-invest with private equity firms to achieve U.S. Diplomatic goals in developing countries. And they invest in major projects, power plants and various things that are helping improve the lives of people that are important to us from a foreign relation point of view. If you just replace the word overseas with space and change a few other words, the charter would fit perfectly with what we're trying to do here. And so it has been done. It's a model that we think makes sense. And we do think it's a loan guarantee program is something that should be done outside of NASA, so it's never counted against NASA, in budget scoring. But it'd be a wonderful thing to set up. And lastly, for the government to attract private capital, they can't be trying to pick winners. And I don't think there's anyone that we met at NASA that was trying to pick winners. They all felt that wasn't their role. But I do think they want to find winners and back them, and I think that's the key. So what does it take to be a winner? In this business plan competition we had this morning, I had the chance to sit with the other judges and go through a list of criteria of how we judge and rank these different business plans, and there was zero disagreement on what those criteria are. Here's 4 of them. We actually came up with 5 or 6, but they're all basically the same thing. It's not enough for the management to be visionary. They have to prove they can execute on the business plan. It's not enough to say that there is going to be a market sometime. You've got to prove that there's an early market and that you understand how it's going to develop. You have to show momentum. You can't just say, well, I've got this great idea, and when you give me the money, then I'm going to start doing stuff. You have to make momentum consistently. And the fourth is money, and that basically comes down to the business model. Does it close? Will the investor get his return on capital and at a reasonable valuation? So the government can help, but there's no substitute for management continuing that momentum. And I wanted to close with a quote from Tim Pickens. I don't know if you know Tim. I'm sure some of you do, and he's, I think, become somewhat famous for this quote. You must dream to succeed, and not having a big budget is no excuse for doing nothing. So the entrepreneurs out there, I would say, don't wait for the government. I think they want to help you, but they may never get as much money as they would like to help you, or they may choose to help others because they think others have a better chance of winning. But don't wait for that government support to make your dream come true. And I would also say this same message probably applies to NASA. Discretionary funding is going to be light for a while, but not having a big budget for supporting the commercial space industry is probably no excuse to do nothing. So that's it. Thanks.
I know we're out of time, but I feel we're at the end of the day. There is more, but we could floor a few questions if there's one or two in the audience. Yes.
You talk a little bit about SBIRs and the value of them growing. There is a subset of SBIR winners that tend to make a profession out of simply implementing them. Did you discuss that in any of your research about ways to mitigate those individuals that might use the tool for something other than the commercialization it was intended?
That is clearly a problem. There are people that just live off of government grants, and we certainly know companies that have SBRs for multiple different parts of the government. I think there has to be, again, this is a funnel. You have more SBI or phase 1 grants than phase 2, and it should decline in phase 3, and it should decline in phase 4. I mean, you're trying to get to those people that are worth the money you're risking on them, and that's not everyone. It's not meant to be a welfare program. It's meant to find the winners. Yeah.
Any more?
Mm-hmm.
Questions? No? There we go.
Thank you.
Hello, sir. One last question over here. I'm just wondering for investors to, if they're not from the space, to try to get their head around exactly what people are doing.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about people investing more money in building wind tunnels or smaller models where we can actually test and see these things happening in front of our eyes versus trying to imagine what's really going on up there?
I think it's even broader than that. Test data is great. Hardware that they can hold, touch, is even better. I mean, we saw some people come up this morning that had hardware. That always impresses people. We just helped NanoRacks raise some money, and being able to walk into an angel group and hold them one of your nano cubes, that says a lot more than a PowerPoint presentation. So yeah, that's all part of the baby steps. If you can actually show you've made progress and you've built something and you've tested something, yeah, that's critical.
Last question.
Hello? Okay.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could comment a little bit about applying these type of entrepreneurial models to another sector, national security space. You made some mention of InQtel, but that's
right.
a very interesting thing all by itself.
Right.
But this whole conference has been about how to apply commercial entrepreneurial concepts to civil NASA space for very big endeavors.
Right.
What about taking traditional missions that could be commercialized, like early warning, military satellite communications, for GPS, for God's sakes. These missions that are are just tremendously expensive in the way the Pentagon
Yeah.
does that. Have you been giving the Pentagon advice
No.
on how they could move forward in this period of budgetary crisis?
No, we have not been asked, and I'm not sure we'd be qualified to do that anyway. But clearly, NASA's budget compared to DoD's budget is, quite a different animal. So I think the challenge for NASA is, even with DoD's budget maybe shrinking, is still far greater. And investors understand national security. That's a market they clearly get. They've invested lots of money into it. So again, if market is the key challenge or the key barrier to investment, that's not such a big barrier on the national defense side. Okay.